We're on Daf Sadi Dalit, Amid Aleph. We're about 2/3 the way down. And we had an issue here about a girsa, which I'd like to revisit with you. And let's see if we can find it. You see a line that begins with the word akalkula. And if you look towards the end of that line, after the word kamashmalon, you'll see parentheses, akalkula di da chaysha, akalkula di zara lo chaysha. So I have here a little bit of a discussion about these words if you have the girsa. He says, Hi chosheshes shelo tekalkel es atzma b'nisuin asurim shelo tuchal lachzor lebayla umevareres heitev lifnei shenisses. So again, in the case of an Eid Echad who testifies meis baileh about an Eishes Ish that her husband died, she's very careful, which is called akelkula dida chaysha, which means that if she marries another man and then her husband is in fact alive, then she can no longer return to the marriage of her husband. So therefore, she wants to clarify beyond the shadow of a doubt, before she gets married to another man, that her husband in fact died. That's why we rely on the testimony of Eid Echad. But al kalkula de zara lo chaysha. She's not so careful and concerned about the kilkul through her offspring, that they become possible. Therefore, in the case of a Yevamot, and she claims that her Yavam is dead, we cannot rely on her testimony because her status still remains kshera. One second, we have to figure that out. Now, again, she wants to get married to some other man, assuming that the Yavam is dead. Now we find out that the Yavam is alive. What are the repercussions? Ain't it if selfs? I don't know what he means by ain't it if selfs. I mean, she certainly cannot marry a Kohen.
Pardon me for a second. Which daf are you on?
I am on Sadi Dalid, I'm at Aleph. And in the Masechet, you'll see a base. And we're on the left column of base. We're trying to figure out this girsa that we got stuck on yesterday. He says, Rak zara nase psul posel lovo bekol bishum mamze. Again, according to that shita of Rav, or for that matter, Rabbi Akiva, who holds yesh mamze b'chavi lavin, so the children become mamzerim, but she herself eina nifselis im yisbarer sheha yovam chav. I wish he would elaborate on that. Again, she can certainly marry 90% of the Jewish population. Maybe I'm exaggerating in 90, but anyway, she can marry anyone who's not a Kohen. But what about a Kohen? Can she marry a Kohen? Does she become a Zona? Does she become a Zona? Where did we discuss this? I'm trying to remember where. Went to Rabbi Akiva. For sure she becomes a Zona. Let's say we disagree with Rabbi Akiva. We hold Zone. I would look it up in the Rambam, but just 1 second, let me just see. I don't have it here. Just take. I don't want to waste too much time on this because it's not critical, but. Kula de Zara. So that's Zara Kahal, and her children Mamzer according to Rabbi Akiva. She's Yevamot Shuk, which is Chavilavim, and Yesh Mamzer Mechavilavim. Remember, where did we speak about zoning? You don't remember by any chance? We had it not long ago, no? No, for some reason I barach li me'arash. I don't want to dwell on this right now because okay. Rava Omar, Eidecha neman b'Yevama mikal l'chom. So an Eidecha could testify that the Yavam died and he's believed, and we're going to derive this halacha from a kal l'chom. Le'isur kares arta, le'isur lav lo kolshke. If she is an Eishes Ish and he testifies that Meis Baila, her husband, went off to far off land, and 1A testifies that he knows that her husband died, and by letting her marry, we're talking about an Isur Kares in an event that her husband is really alive, and yet we will allow her to get married based on the testimony of 1A to the effect that her husband died. Then in the case of Yevama, which is relatively kal, because we're only dealing with an Isur Lav, an event that the Yavam is still alive, how much more so should we be Matir Holy Nase based on the testimony of 1H and Meis Yavam? So if Meis Bailech is enough to be Matir her to get married, how much more so would Meis Yevamech be enough to allow her to get married? And again, this also touches on the question of a woman whose husband has a son, but we're not sure who died first, he or his son. So the aide testifies that the son died, that the father died first, meaning the husband of this wife, and therefore he left behind him a zera, he left behind himself a ben, and therefore there's no yibum. And therefore she can get married. Or she falls for Yibum, or the other way around. Let's take the case where the Eid Echad testifies. That's a good case, because now she can marry anyone, because the son died after the father, after the husband. To object to this Kal V'chomer, he atzma tochia. I'm going to prove to you that you cannot derive a kavachomer to be materi yevama with one aid from the fact that a married woman could be niteres for yedechad, because the aidus of the woman herself, we're going to be machalik between an isa karis and isa lav. And if a woman says meis baila, her husband died, and she wants to get married, and that's an isa karis in case her husband's alive, he tarta. Yet you allowed her to get married based on her own testimony. Now, in the case of Yevamot, where she says meis hayavam, and she wants to get married to someone bin ashuk, there the isa is only an isa lav. And lo itarta. Even though the Isser is relatively kal, nevertheless, we're not going to allow her to get married to someone from the shuk based on her own claim, her own testimony. So you see that your kal vachomer from an Isser kal to an Isser chamor, from an Isser lav to an Isser karis, doesn't necessarily hold water. We're going to have cases in which she's believed against an Isser karis, but she's not believed against an Isser lav. She's believed to be matter herself and say, my husband died, and yet she's not believed to say, my Yavam died, even though it's only an Isa lav. What happened to your Kal V'chomer? So again, you have Eid Echad and you have Ha'isha Atzma. Rava said that in Eid Echad, we have a Kal V'chomer, that if he's believed, in the case of Eishes each, which is an Isa Kares, how much more so he's believed in Meis Yavam, which is an Isa lav. Well, what about her? In her case, the tables are turned in the reverse. She is not believed in the case of Yevami Mes, even though it's only an Isa lav. And yet she is believed to say Meis Baili, even though that's an Isa Karetz. So now the Gemara analyzes why a woman is not believed in the case of Meis Yevameh, but she is believed to say Meis Baili, and we'll see how that logical distinction will impact on the case of Yevamah, of Meis Yevameh. Ela my time man, then why isn't she believed to say Meis Yavam, even though we're only talking about the Isur Yevamah L'Shuk, which is an Isur Kal, it's only an Isur Lav, whereas Eishes Ish, to get married to someone else, and the Rabbanan believe him. That is an Isur Kares, it's more Chamur. The Keva, the Zimnin, the Sanya Lo Daika, you could have a frequent occurrence, it's quite common, that she hates the Yavam. I don't know if she hates him, but she certainly doesn't want to marry. It's there for Lo Daika. When she hears a rumor that the Yavam died and that she's free to marry anyone else, she's thrilled because she doesn't want to marry this Yavam. She'll rely on that flimsy evidence and she'll wave the banner of Yevami Meis. She doesn't want to marry the Yavam. Umitzu. She'll get married to someone else. She'll marry anyone but the Yavam. Is if that be the case, then should we rely on her testimony that the Yavam died when she's not going to be Mavareres? She's not going to really clarify where the Yavam died. She jumped on the bandwagon. She heard what she wanted to hear, right? That's what psychologists say, you hear what you want to hear. She heard that her Yavam died. Great. Now she can marry anyone else because the last one in the world she wanted to marry was the Yavam. However, if a woman says that her husband died, she's believed, she doesn't hate her husband. You don't have to believe that she hates her husband such that she doesn't want to remain in that marriage. We assume she really wants to remain in the marriage. And therefore, unless she clarifies with a bearer of certainty, she would not claim my husband is dead. And therefore, let's apply the same logic to the case of Eid Echad. We can make the same distinction. An Eid Echad is believed to say that her husband died. because the Chachamim are relying on the birur of the Isha, the wife, that she would not get married unless she did a total, thorough birur and came to the certain conclusion that her husband died. Eid Echad, who is testifying that the Yavam died, Nabi. Why should we believe him to say that the Yavam died? Because again, we want to bolster the credibility of the Eid Echad based on the fact that she would not marry someone from the Shuk unless she was convinced that her husband died. Her Yavam died, and that's not the case. She relied on very flimsy evidence, came forward and said, well, I know that my Yavam is dead, but she really doesn't know it at all. She doesn't have a Yediyah Brura. She's simply placing it on the hearsay and the rumor that Yavam is dead. So why should we believe the Eid Echad when he doesn't have the extra evidence to rely on that she would check out to make sure, be certain that her Yavam died? And all this, the upshot of this whole discussion is that Rava's Kal V'chomer falls to the wayside. What was Rava's logic? That if an Eid Echad is believed to say Meis Bailo, which is an Isakaris, how much more so should we believe him to say Meis Yevamot, which is only an Isalah, and allow her to marry the Isha? Gemara is rejecting Rav. The logic is not soundproof because in every case of Eid Echad, the testimony is accepted based on the tziruf, based on the additional factor of evidence of Isha Daiku Mitzvah. And Isha Daiku Mitzvah is absolutely reliable in the case of Meis Bailech, in the case of Meis Ish, because she doesn't harbor any enmity to her husband. There's no reason to assume so. She very much wants this marriage to continue. If she testifies that her husband died and she wants to marry another man, it must be because she's absolutely certain with Daiku Mitzvah, with a Mevareres Hetev, that her husband in fact died. Now we can believe the Eid Echad. But in the case of Yevamot, where it's quite common that she doesn't have any interest in marrying this Yavam whatsoever, she wants to be free of the bondage of Zikas Yibum and marry anyone in the Shuk, she's not going to clarify whether in fact this rumor, the hearsay that our Yavam died is true. And therefore we don't want to rely on one aid. Now the Mishnah states, Zem Midrash Darash Rabbi Elazar ben Masya, Isha Grusha me Isha lo yikachu, V'lo mi ish she'ena eno isha. So maybe I think it's kedai at this point to review the Mishnah. Let me see. It's been a while. Let's see the Mishnah. I think it's on Tzadi Aleph. Here it is, the end of the Mishnah Daf Tzadi Beis Omid Aleph. Gemara fell. Just pick it up. Now, if you have the Masifta, you'll see Tzadi Beis Omid Aleph with a Dalid in brackets. Etzu Darash Rabbi Elazar ben Masya. In the parsha of Surei Nisuin of Kohanim, it says, "V'isha grusha meisha lo yikachu." and for the fact that it says May Isha, we're going to derive the conclusion that Dafka Nisgarsha Mi Isha Mi Baila, then she's Asur L'Kron. Veloshin Nisgarsha Mi Isha Na Isha. This second person is not her husband, and his Kedusha to her is Lo Tafsi. So she's not an Ashes Ish. And in such a case, the Gerushin is not a Gerushin, and she's allowed to marry a Kohen. So a husband comes back after they accepted testimony that he had died. Lo and behold, he's alive and well. She got married to someone else. So certainly, she's psula min hakohuna. But that would be a case. Yeah. Well, let's scratch that for now. She is allowed to marry a Kohen if she goes back to her husband. In the case of Niskad Shaliachet, she didn't have a relationship with another man. She only had Kiddushin. Her husband now, her first husband comes back. She's allowed to go back and marry him. And resume the marriage relationship. And even if the husband that she married, when she thought that her husband was dead, he does not have to give a get. Or alternatively, his get is meaningless. Because she goes back to her original husband. She couldn't get married to someone else. That marriage is not valid. And to the same extent that get is non-valid, it's a non-entity, she can marry a Kohen if her first husband don't. Rabbi Yehuda Marav. I'm a little confused here. Maybe you could fill me in. Why does Rebbe Lazar need a drasha? What was the Hava meaning? Unless we're dealing with the Rabbanos. What did I say it was? Sari Beis Tal, right? What was the Hava meaning? Okay, so let's see. Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Havile le Rabbi Eliezer le Midrashpei Marganisa Vidorash. Rabbi Yehuda is saying that Rabbi Lazar had an alternative drasha to derive that a get, which is given by someone other than the Baal, does not in any way impact on her status or kashus lakuna. It doesn't pass lakuna. L'midrash Bay, and it would have been a marganisa, it would have been a margalit, which is, I think, a pearl in English. Vidorash Bay, aspe. And instead, he gave up on what should have been a more viable drasha in favor of a drasha that is called a chaspa. It's a piece of pottery. What does that mean? That it's a davar pasha, that a get that was given by someone else who's not a husband. I don't need a person to teach me that she's kshera lakuna. How could that get even an avni pasal lakuna? My barganisa, but which drasha could he have opted for, which is a pearl of wisdom, as we would say. This sign we have a brayso of Isha Grusha Me Isha Lo Yikafu, and it says Me Isha Afil Lo Nisgarsha Ela Me Isha Sula Lekahuna. Now this drasha gives us the exact opposite conclusion, which is called Reich HaGet. It says in the pasuk Me Isha, which I guess is superfluous. It's redundant. Could have said Visha Grusha Lo Yikach. What's Me Isha? Afil on his gasha ela Me Isha Sul Lakud. The post of Reich HaGet. What's the case of Reich HaGet? So he wasn't matir to get married to anyone. He just said, "At megureshes mimeni," let's keep far away from each other. Is then psul linase lekuna. If subsequently her husband died, she cannot marry a kohen. So there is a psul in kahuna of a grusha who is only reach haget. The get itself was not effective to be matir her to marry anyone, and yet she cannot marry a kohen as a result of receiving this get. And I suspect that Rabbi Yehuda Marav is dissenting and rejecting Rabbi Elias's drasha in favor of this drasha called Reach HaGet. It's hard to say because the Gemara is deriving it from a pasuk. I mean, it could be it's only an esmata, and then it's only Xer D'Rabbanan, like you said. But that would be my fallback position. My initial impression here is that we're talking about a psul d'oraisa that's derived from the pasuk of Isha. Rafil lo nizkar she'elu Isha, which is not a get. He says, "Einat muteres l'chol adam," and yet she's psul l'kahuna. But how does that apply to our case where she got married to someone when her husband is still alive? You're right. I mean, that would seem to be only an issue of spectator. Let me just take a look in the Yalkut HaBi'urim. I just have to find it first. We're on Tzadik Dalet. Miloshen HaGemara mashma shedrasha sabraisa shereach haget posel lakuni drasha gemura. V'hoylo l'Rabbi Elazar l'farish sheba ha'kosim l'drasha zu. And if that be the case, then the exact opposite conclusion would be that she's psula kahuna. Rambam Kosav, Hilchos Gerushin Perek Shareach Haget Eino Posel Elo Midrabbanan. V'ira Magid Mishnah Sharambam Sofer Shedroshim Zu Asmachta B'Alma. Oh, that's what we suggested. Achem B'Lechem Mishnah Hikshalav Shemidivrei Rabbi Yehuda Shedroshim Zu Margolis he calls it a gem, a pearl, is nira. It seems to appear that drasha gmura. Valkane, therefore, Hoyler Ablazel Lidrosh Sakosik Drasha Zu. Shem Eina El Asmach to be Alma, if we accept the Rambam sheet, this whole drasha, Reach Haget is only an Asmach, Ein La Solo. Why is Rabbi Yehuda Marav objecting Al Shalom Dorash Sakosik Drasha Zu when it's not a real drasha? Achar Chlaner Kosav Sha'arab Mikano Chof She'ein Zu Drasha Gemu. Shemidir Rabbi Yehuda Nira She'ein Lidrosh Sakosav El Drasha Achas. Kevish Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Elazar Dorish Sakosav Ame Shanosen Get Lishto Sheina Shalo Eino Posel Osola Kahuna Shuv Ein Hu Yachol Josh Sakosav Ki Josh Sabraisa the Nira Shenimtzal Dvarav Reach Haget Eino Ela Min Rabbana. Ulaficha Kevin Shalom Atzinu B'Mishnah Tana Shecholek Al Rabbi Elazar B'Drosh Sakosu Ein Drasha Zu El Asmach. If I understand, the Aruch Laner is saying that everybody agrees there's no machlokus in our Mishnah, and even the Tanakam of our Mishnah accepts the drasha of Rabbi Elazar, which would mean in a case where a woman whose husband is alive doesn't need a get from a second husband, and the get would not possible kuna, it's a meaningless get. So that drasha of Rabbi Elazar is absolutely acceptable. And according to the Aruch Laner, the argument of Rabbi Yehuda is to accept the asmachta, but I don't think that asmachta of Reach Haget is going to contradict the unanimous opinion of our Mishnah in the case where there is no Reach Haget. So Reach Haget would be when the husband gave a get to his wife, although he added a condition which undermines and torpedoes the get, invalidating it, but nevertheless it was a get that she received from her husband, and that, based on the asmachta of afilu lo nisgarsha el meisha psula kuna, but not in the case where she got a get from somebody who's not married. Omnam b'kiyukna diyona, that's an sefer because of shal kocha droshes Rabbi Elazar ain't a drosha gemura she'im kain lo hoy Rabbi Yehuda omer al droshos shichas imiu asher yomar al droshes hatanoim she'inam reuyos or rayos el shesav Rabbi Yehuda she'ein tzarich lomar shano sein get leisha she'ena shalo ein apostle solakuna a getting of chalal of klal. A getting of chalal leha klal. Valkain muchach lo Rabbi Elazar lo dorish kain es hakosu elas machtu bi alma. Lefichach amar im kain hoylo lidrosh hakosu lidrosh tova yoser shereach haget posel. My impression is that the bottom line of this sugya is that for sure she's not possible good in the case where she ran off with another man and she married him and her husband is still alive. For sure, that wouldn't be possible when he gives her a gift. That's how. But the Gemara wants to push for another agenda that we should assume that if the Baal himself gave her a get, that get could generate and would generate, whether it's Doraisa or Rabbanan is unclear, a psul l'kahuna b'toras reich, because it came from the husband. Okay, then, so I just want to mark out what we did, and then make a note of what we didn't get up to yet. That is the Mishnah on the bottom of Tzadik Dal. So I think I have to figure this out. John and maybe Don, I don't know, Don might be on vacation, but when they get together, so we'll continue the shir. If you have any option of listening to the shir online and recording, that would be great. Okay then? All right, Shabbat Shalom.